You're using EQ wrong. I was using EQ wrong for years, even decades. My mixes always felt really crowded even when there were just a few instruments. Tracks would sound perfect when I soloed them, but then literally disappear in the mix no matter how loud I made them. It was driving me crazy. And the reason why is that I was using the wrong kind of EQ. No, not like an expensive plugin or some crazy piece of hardware. I mean, I was using the wrong mindset, the wrong process. How often have you spent an hour EQing your guitar tone, making a million perfectly tiny little cuts just to craft the exact guitar tone you want, getting rid of all the hiss you can hear? It sounds great in solo when you compare it, but then you bring it into your mix. It just gets lost. The problem is you got hung up on the first kind of EQ we're going to talk about. Corrective EQ is used to fix problems in the recording process. If you find there's a really annoying 60-cycle hum in your recording, or a snare drum that just has way too much ring in it, or a guitar tone that just came out really, really thin, you're going to want to use an EQ to correct these problems. And it can get pretty intense. You can end up making cuts like the ones you saw on that guitar tone. But the truth is, you need to fix those problems first at the source. If there's hum or hiss in your recordings, do what you can to isolate the electronics you're using, turn off any like fluorescent lights you have going on, make sure you have good gain staging in your recording process, and watch this video if you don't know what that is. If your snare drum's ringing too much, spend some time either tuning it or muffling it with stuff like tape, or I've even put a wallet on the snare drum before just to mute it. If your guitar tone is too thin, make sure you're putting the mic in the right place to maximize the tone you want. There's so much that goes into mic positioning that determines the tone of an instrument. You don't want to be trying to fix this stuff later when you could get it right in the first place. And I'm going to have some videos on great mic technique on here real soon. The other truth is that most of us are making music with pre-recorded samples from incredible companies like Native Instruments, Arturia, East West, who have all recorded these in incredible studios and already done the work to make sure they sound amazing from the start. You don't need to do corrective EQ on these instruments. If you're going to EQ in a corrective mindset, it should really only be on something you recorded in real life with a microphone. And even then, try to make sure you're getting the right sound from the beginning in the recording process, not when you're mixing. This next kind of EQ is really cool, but it probably has a place more in the production process, not the mixing process. I'm talking about creative EQ. This is EQ that fundamentally changes and reshapes the sound you're working with to achieve a specific goal within the music. For example, I've got this little guitar intro in this song. And I'd really like this intro to feel like it's coming out of a little radio or something. So I'm going to use a high pass filter, a really steep one, and a low pass as well, just to really narrow out the frequency spectrum. And that got the effect I wanted. This is creative EQ, but I'm changing the sound to give it an effect. I'm not doing this to help it fit better in the mix. So I would do this while I'm producing and writing the song, not while I'm mixing the tracks at the end of the process. Creative EQ is such a great tool in your music production process, but it's not going to help your mixes fit better together. That brings me to the last and, in my opinion, most important kind of EQ we're going to talk about today, and that's what I'm calling constructive EQ. This isn't a word I've seen anywhere used by mixers, but it's the best word I can find to describe what I'm about to show you. This way of using an EQ is the most important and I think most misunderstood approach to using it. Constructive EQ is making broad, subtle changes to help the pieces of your mix fit better together and stand out where you want them to. It's, in my opinion, the make or break between an amazing mix and a muddy, disgusting mess. Now, I've broken this concept up into 3 principles I try to stick to when I'm EQing in a mix. The first is to make broad, wide cuts with my EQ. No more obsessing over these tiny little surgical frequency cuts. Because at the end of the day, unless there was something truly horrifying in that guitar tone, it's not going to make a difference to the end listener. And in fact, it's probably going to make your mixing job harder at the end of the day, trying to fix this completely torn apart, barely hanging on remnant of a guitar tone into a mix in some way that feels big and full. You've carved it to absolute pieces. There's nothing left to work with. I just want to make the big changes that matter, and making these wide changes with an EQ lets me make those without the artifacts and the weird resonant frequencies that come with these obsessive tiny little cuts. So here's the first rule. Make broad moves with high shelves, low shelves, and high passes and low passes. These are the bread and butter tools we're going to use to fix the balance issues in our mix and make space for the instruments we want to hear. Now let's talk about how to use these tools. This next concept is the absolute key to using EQ properly, so I'm going to show you step by step everything I would do in this mix. The next principle is that constructive EQ has two actions you can take. You can separate instruments from each other, carving out space from one so the other can be heard, or you can join instruments together, boosting a frequency that unifies them, really glues them together in your mix so they act like one sound. Using both of these tools, separation and joining, is the key to a mix that sounds huge and clear at the same time. To show you this, I want to take a look at the relationship between the guitar and the bass in this song. So I'm going to solo them for now. Right now, this sounds like kind of a muddy mess. They kind of sound like one instrument, but not in a good way. It's just kind of one all-consuming blob in the center of the mix. So I'm going to separate the guitar tone we want to hear from the bass tone that's clouding it, while also letting the full fundamental frequency of the bass come through clearly so we get the punch and the body of the sound with it. Finally, we're going to join these two sounds together by finding a frequency where they both meet really nicely. Now, in just listening to these two tones, I can tell there is too much going on in the mid-range and the high mids. Guitars should be occupying those high mids. Bass does not need to be getting up there as much. I'm going to start with a pretty aggressive high shelf cut in the bass. Let's take a listen. That's a pretty huge cut. I'm cutting 12 dB all the way up from about 400 hertz. That's most of the high end of the bass. And if I was to listen to that bass tone soloed, I would hate it. But listen to it in the mix between these two instruments. There's more room for the guitar to come through, but the body of the bass is still there. Now, on the other hand, that body of the bass is feeling pretty cloudy. It feels muffled and crowded in a way that's just undermining the whole foundation of the mix. I'm going to use a high pass in the guitars to cut out those low frequencies where we don't need them. And you're going to hear the bass tone clear up as I do this. All we've done so far is make two very simple moves. We did a high shelf cut in the bass and a high pass in the guitars, cutting out those low frequencies. Let's take a listen to the difference before and after our EQ changes and see if you can hear the clarity between these instruments change. Here's after. You probably want to make sure you're listening on either headphones or studio monitors to really hear the difference here. And don't worry if you're not hearing everything super clearly yet. What matters is you understand these concepts and you start applying them on your own. Once you've played with them for a bit, you will start to hear the difference, I promise. So now we've successfully separated these two tones. I do want them to feel connected still. I want to find a frequency between the two of these that complement each other. For heavy guitars, I usually find that's in the low mid-range, around this 200-300 mark, maybe even lower. I'm going to take a really wide bell node here, and we're going to try to find somewhere that makes the guitar and bass feel like they're glued together. Even though we haven't mixed the drums yet, I just want to see what this picture looks like in the context of the full mix. I try not to stay in solo too long, just focusing on one or two tracks, because you can really lose sight of how those pieces are going to fit into the bigger puzzle. Notice I'm always comparing the changes I've made back and forth to make sure I actually like the results of what I've done. It's really easy to do something because you feel like you should and not give a ton of thought to whether you actually improved your mix. Let's listen one more time to the changes we've made with both these EQs. Cool. There's one more piece of this puzzle, and that's dealing with our drums. I'm going to bring in one more EQ here. You don't have to keep all your EQs on screen at the same time. I just have them here for demonstration purposes in this video. Now it's time to talk about the last principle of constructive EQ, and that's to mix with purpose. I kind of already said it. You want to be making changes that actually improve the mix, not just because you feel like you should. When you make these moves with an EQ, you should make sure you can hear the difference and that you actually like the difference. Anytime you grab a high shelf, a high pass, a low pass, you should know why you're doing it before you make the change. You should be working with intention. It's really easy to end up on autopilot in a mix and just, oh, I cut the lows out of my guitars because that's what I always do. You want to really listen to your mix, determine what problems you hear, and then fix those problems directly. So I'm going to listen to the relationship between the drums, bass, and guitar and see if I hear any problems. So there's two things I'm hearing. One is the relationship between the bass and the kick drum. They're the only two things that should be living in those low frequencies, and I want to make sure they're coexisting well. We're listening to the whole drum set, but this EQ is only affecting our kick drum. Remember, we can separate and we can join. Which do we want to do here? I think for this one, it's going to be both. I want to join them together in the low frequencies so they punch harder with the beat, but I also want to separate the kick from the rest of the bass tone and the guitar tone so it can stand clearly on its own. First, I'm going to find a frequency in the kick drum that joins it to the bass in a way I like. Don't be afraid to make really big pushes with this. Even if you're just finding the frequency, it's okay to push it literally all the way to the top of the screen. If we take a look at where the bass is actually living, it's right around this 100 hertz mark. So we can push our kick drum under that in these deep sub frequencies, or over the bass in these low mids. We can also try to join the kick directly to the bass by pushing in that same range where it's resonating. I just pulled down the output gain of this EQ because, remember, according to good gain staging, you want to make sure the volume coming out of something is the same as the volume going into it. This way I'm not tricking myself by just hearing that louder is better. I like this EQ move. It feels like the bass drum is fuller now, and it's moving right along with the bass. Now I want to separate it from the rest of the bass tone and the guitars. We've made this high shelf cut, but there's still a lot of bass tones coming out of this range in the bass and in the mid-range of the guitars too. I'm going to make a pretty wide cut in the mid-range of the kick. Let's hear that in the context of the full mix and see if we like it. I don't like it. I don't think it's making a meaningful difference in this mix. I was wrong, and that's okay. I didn't plan that. I was really just wrong. But I'd still like to hear more of this kick drum separated from the rest of the mix, so I may try boosting the high frequencies of the kick instead. In this case, I'm going to try to find a good resonance for the really clicky edge of the kick drum, and I'm going to use another bell curve like this. That is a change I like. It's bringing out the clarity of the kick. Listen to the difference in the changes we made. These two simple boosts. We're not making the kick drum louder. We've cut the output of this to compensate for these changes. But let's listen to what it sounds like. There's more clarity, there's more body in the kick joining it to the bass. It's just fitting into the mix better. The other change I wanted to make was bringing out some of the clarity of the higher end of the drums. To do that, I want to look at the relationship between the two things occupying the high end of this frequency spectrum, and that's the drums and the guitars. Something really simple I could do just to emphasize those high frequencies would be a high shelf. Let's find out. That did help. I think that helped a lot. I may try cutting a high shelf out of the guitars too, just to see what happens. I don't think that's making a meaningful enough difference, and when I cut it enough for it to really make a difference in the drums, it kind of ruined the guitar tone. I don't want to go that far with it. I may try cutting some of the high mids with a wider band though. No, I'm not finding any changes there that I like. And this is the process of using an EQ properly while mixing. One more important bonus tip is to take breaks. This is probably the point where I'd step away from the mix for a moment, go grab a glass of water or take a walk, let my ears rest for just a second, because your ears will tire out. Everything will start to kind of sound like garbage to you, and you won't be able to make these essential decisions in your mix. So take breaks. Using constructive EQ in this way will give you a whole new world of control in how your mix fits together. It'll give you tracks that fit together cleanly, clearly, and focus on the elements in the song that matter most. I've put a link in the description to these files so you can download them and try mixing yourself. If you want to hear me go in depth on all three kinds of EQ, you can head over to quickstartmusic.com and check out our mixing course. Now, all the mixing moves I made in this video were in this simple graphic EQ. But there are a lot of other options to use. How do you know which one to use and when? Do you need all these different plugins? Do you need analog gear? Why do people pay so much for these expensive plugins? We're going to find that out together for my next video. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more videos like this one posted every week, and I'll see you next time.